Cool. All right. So, hello. Welcome to the Terrific Tips for Business podcast. Terrific can't be spelled without Terry. And I am your guest host, CJ Howard. I am doing a segment of this podcast where I'm going to be interviewing exceptional artists about the overlap between business and art. And today, my guest is Jessica Singerman. And I am so excited to have Jessica on this podcast because Jessica lived alternatively between France and the United States during her early life and earned her BA magna cum laude from College of William and Mary in Virginia, and her Master's of Fine Arts from University of Delaware while on a fellowship. Amazing. Her watercolors are the subject of a book published in 2017 called The Little Watercolor Squares. And her award-winning paintings and drawings are exhibited and collected internationally. In previous lives, she taught yoga and worked as a guide, leading epic bicycle tours all over Europe, Central America, and Australia. She rides bikes and runs and lives in Winston-Salem, North Carolina with her husband and their son. So I'm so excited to have you here today. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. I'm really excited.
I'm stoked. It's going to be great. So my first question that I wanted to ask you is, when did you fall in love with making art?
Wow, that's a tough question because when have I not been making art? Mm-hmm. I think like everyone else, I've been making artwork or I've been making things since I was a kid. And I guess I got quote unquote serious about it when I was a teenager. Let's see, I think when I decided to go to graduate school, that's kind of a serious step.
Yeah, absolutely.
And, I think at that point I was basically deciding that this is what I was going to do for the rest of my life. But at that point I was mainly focusing on making my artwork and not necessarily running a business. So that came later.
Absolutely. And did you find that was probably pretty common in school, where most people were focused on just the art making and not so much on the business side of things?
Yes, I do think so. And I think the art world is still like that. Things are changing now because of the internet. And artists can now share their work with more people because of the internet. And so although it is nice to show your work in a gallery, and some of my relationships with galleries are really beneficial for both of us, not every artist needs a gallery anymore to sell their work and to make a living from their work. I was lucky enough, though, when I was in graduate school, we had a business of art class, but it did focus primarily on working within that more traditional system, meaning artists making their work and then galleries representing the artists and selling their work for them. So it wasn't a class on how to run a business in an entrepreneurial way, let's say.
Mm-hmm. That makes sense to me. I think that's been a similar experience that I had as well in any sort of art programs that I was a part of, was that it was surprising to me because you're releasing this generation of artists out into the world, right? And I think many young artists get caught in the same traps where you're either, paying a lot of money for juried shows, or, you're trying to get gallery representation and not taking ownership of your own sales. And I think there's a lot of opportunity to learn from artists like you who, you still show in Charlotte and you show elsewhere, but you also very much have a online presence where you take sales and commissions and all these things, through you. So I think there's a lot to learn from this kind of dual, maybe symbiotic relationship here, because it's not easy to pick up if you're not actively trying to learn it, right? Like, it's not going to just appear in your brain if you're not doing the research and making the mistakes that come from, trying new things. So
for sure.
Absolutely. So I was going to ask, since you've kind of highlighted some of your education, but what has been kind of your biggest success or your highlight of your art career so far?
I think there are a lot. I think as an artist, well, probably or as a human, there are different kinds of success, right? And I think if we just look at financial success, I think we'll be very disappointed, right? So although, yes, financial success is really exciting, and it is, I recently sold my biggest piece, for instance.
Congratulations.
Today. Thank you. So that was a really big deal. But I do find a lot of success in my own artistic practice and creative success. So for instance, last year I made I did like a room-sized installation in Charlotte at the gallery that represents me, actually, at over Elder Gallery of Contemporary Art, where I suspended 1,200 paper cranes, very large paper cranes I'd folded from the ceiling in this mountain formation, and it was, larger than life. And I had worked on it for over 2 years, so it was very satisfying. And it felt very successful because it had been, very challenging, both on a technical standpoint, because there was just simply so many hours of my time that went into it, but logistically it was very complicated to figure out, and it changed a lot from
Mm.
conception to completion. And then I led and managed a team of interns to help me install the piece, and it went really well. I had planned everything well enough so that when I got there, I was able to execute. And so that was very satisfying, and that felt like a really big success for me creatively. So yeah, I think there are different types of success, and it's important to,
Yeah.
to think about them in different ways.
And that's beautiful because that's also pointing into artists are also project managers, right? Like
Right.
you're leading teams of people to make these, especially it's not just, people who make monumental sculptures. It's people who do installation. It's even painters who have studios of apprentices who are doing work with them. I think a lot of people view artists as being these very solo makers, but as you pointed out, like we have to be manage a team as well in a lot of
Right.
senses. So I love that that's a part of your success is the all these ways that that piece challenged you and that you were able to rise and meet that challenge and learn. And I'm assuming that all of that has informed how you've made paintings from then on. Has that been the case?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I think, when I've been working now, I guess, professionally, or just making work for a long time. And it all kind of builds on itself. Even though we go, I think of them as like side trips when we explore different things, when we're kind of, for me, it's like the in-between times when I'm in between larger projects, I allow myself to kind of play and explore and figure different things out, and all of that works its way into your bigger artwork. We don't always know how, but it all counts.
Absolutely. That's beautiful. And so I'm gonna, since we are keeping these really short, I did want to specifically talk about how COVID-19 maybe has impacted the business and or creative side of your art practice. Like what has your experience been now that we're many months into this?
Yeah, I mean, for me, on on one level, there wasn't a whole lot that changed as far as schedule, because my
Hmm.
studio is at home, and so I was working from home already. The big difference being that everyone was suddenly at home with me. So the homeschooling aspect, that's been interesting.
Yeah, no
uh,
kidding.
Luckily, my husband has also been working from home, so that's been, great. We're sharing the load. And as far as my work, I do think that early on, especially when sheltering in place was very fresh, and um, I think I was feeling the effects of really having to stay in and really not seeing
Mm.
anyone except for my immediate family, really did affect my work. I'm actually going to be showing some new paintings, or some paintings that I made over the course of the last few months, uh, at Elder Gallery, actually,
Mm.
in 2 weeks. I have a show opening there on November 6th, and they're all paintings that I did. I mean, they're basically quarantine paintings.
Wow.
Um, so but I think that it's not just COVID, it's the everything, politically and socially that's been going on has impacted my work, because I think as artists, we're very sensitive people. I know I'm an empath, and I feel very strongly for people, and it's impossible not to let everything that's happening around the world, or specifically around the US, impact our work,
Mm.
and the way that we think about our work. Um,
Absolutely.
yeah.
Yeah. And I that really talks a lot about the creative side and what you've been making, but just business wise, have you had to change any tactics or has it been very similar since you are still in the same workspace? But just what have you noticed on the business side of
I feel
things?
like I had to get really scrappy.
Mm, mm.
Always been like very much about the hustle, and just working a lot, to, both in my practice, my artistic practice, but also building my business, which I think is what any entrepreneur would relate with.
Mm,
Um, and March for sure was quite scary from a business point of view. And it made me kind of rethink how I was running my business, and um, how I was going about bringing in an income.
yeah.
And I just had to, it forced me to get creative with my work and how I was selling it,
Mm.
and how to connect with my audience. Um, and so it's been good. I feel like if we can get through this period, we can get through anything.
I I feel a lot of the same things. So I'm there with you. Like I think it's also showing us that if it's not sticking, if it's not working, just change it. Like you don't
Yes.
have to feel like you have to keep hammering at the same thing because it's what somebody said. Because it felt like by May, any business advice people had given before March, it's just no longer applicable. Like we're just kind of,
Yeah, yes and no. I mean, some of it is still applicable, but I
yeah.
think, once you've been doing this long enough, you know what makes sense, and you know in your gut what just doesn't anymore. And
Mhm.
yeah, no, I agree with you.
And
It's
I love what you started doing since I do follow you. I love that you've started doing these like kind of little snippets with the like video snippets with the piece in the studio and talking about it with people. So it's like these little mini studio visits, and that they get not only a sense of you and your personality, but they get to see the space, the painting in space, get to see what it looks like in proportion to you, which is not always easy to do when you're photographing work. Have
right.
you seen specific responses or any sort of way that that has changed your engagement by doing that specific tactic?
Yeah, and that, I mean, I'm glad that you noticed that, because that was one of the ways that I have tried to share my work in a way that feels more intimate, but through digital media. Because not everyone is comfortable coming for a studio visit. I mean, I know I wasn't comfortable having anyone over for a long time, but now I think we know more, and we know we can be distant and wear masks and do things to keep, or to mitigate risk.
Hmm.
But when I started making those videos, I really did, like you said, I wanted to give people a sense of scale of the work and talk about it in a way that was, felt, I guess, personal, or kind of like, like if we were just having a conversation about the work. Because, art doesn't necessarily speak for itself. And so it is nice to be able to talk about the story, and share, what you were thinking as an artist when you made the work, or maybe some about the process. But yeah, that has been one of the things that I've done, is more videos, and shorter ones.
Hmm.
So yeah.
And I think that what you just said, that the art doesn't actually always speak for itself. I think that's so key. And I think that as artists, it can be, we wish that would be the case. That would kind of take some of the pressure off, right? Like if art just magically could tell people what it's about. But I also think maybe people who don't necessarily make art don't recognize that either. Like there can be so much more layer and depth to what is there than just the specific colors that are on a canvas if it's a painting. Um, so have you found that the way that you talk about your work has also changed during this time? Not just the methods that you're using, but is the way that you talk about it, or do you feel like you were pretty clear before this?
Yeah, I don't think that the way I've been talking about my work has changed during this, COVID period.
Hmm.
I'd been working actively on making sure that my language was really clear, um, for years now, because
Mm.
it's not something that we're necessarily taught in art school. I think a lot of us come out of art school speaking or writing in a strange art speak that is pretty opaque to most
Yeah.
people, even
Agreed.
artists. And I know my eyes would pretty much roll back in my head when I look at that stuff now. Um, and so, I've been making a concerted effort for years now to write about my work in a way that is approachable and inviting, and will actually, share something tangible about the work, and that people can connect with.
Mm.
Um, but I think that it just only becomes more important in a period like this one, when a lot of people don't want to leave their homes anymore, or they at least don't want to gather in any places. So, and it has worked,
Mhm.
if work means selling, well, the work's selling, then yes, it's been a good year for me.
Good.
Um, yeah.
And I think I especially find the way that you write about your work to be engaging. It's you were able to call in references and sensory memories within me to connect your work to these places that you talk about in your through your paintings, and it's really lovely. I love reading when you post something about your work, and I think
Thank
that
you. I'm glad.
artists, I think I can, since you've had an MFA, and I can see almost like see it in the writing, like see the unlearning you've done of
Yes,
like get this
exactly.
unlearning
Right.
of how like to not try to impress with your art speak credentials, but to
Right.
actually focus on the engagement with either the collector or the person who's just seeing the piece and isn't going to buy it, but is just going to see it and it's going to impact them. And I think
That's exactly it.
you're exceptional at that. And
Oh, thank
I,
you.
I can't, I think a big part of why I wanted to talk to you is because you are so good at that. And that I think anyone who stumbles across this should go check out your website and
Thank
learn how
you.
you're doing it. Because I think if artists were able to let go of the ego of the art speak that it was kind of drilled into us so that we could be accepted by the upper echelons of the art market, right? Like we have a better chance of actually connecting with people that this art will matter to, and make an impact in their life. So I'm so grateful that you mentioned that in this conversation.
Well, thank you. And I'm glad you mentioned, I think the ego is the thing. I try to remove the ego. I'm not trying to impress
Mm,
anyone when I'm writing. I'm just trying to be clear, as clear as possible, which is hard when you're talking about, emotional stuff or,
mm,
sensory things. And writing about artwork is tough, but I think it's good. I think I've learned a lot about my own work
mm.
writing in that way.
And that's true. And then, so for people who haven't physically seen Jessica's work, either you haven't picked up that she's in her studio right now if you're watching a video, or you are listening to this audio. But Jessica, you make these really beautiful, complex, abstract pieces that have lovely, like organic shapes, but also some really fun geometric shapes. But then also you pull in these palettes from like color palettes of these places that you've been, and it's just fascinating to see what you are able to uh, allude to without being super specific. So I think that's one of the beauties of your work, is that you can put this piece anywhere and it feels like it fits there no matter where it is. I feel like your pieces are very good at being like, oh, this was naturally made for this wall in this place, even though any place that it goes, it'll feel like, oh, it was naturally supposed to be on that wall in that place.
I'm going to hire you to talk about my work.
Introduce you anytime. um, so I know we have to stop here very soon, but if you could give someone who's either fresh out of art school or somebody who's just decided they want to get into painting and they want to try to sell their work, what is either one piece of advice or one resource that you would recommend that they start with as they move into whatever is the next phase that they're of the work that they're working on?
So specifically for artists who
Mm-hmm.
want to build a business, I would say make sure that you're still carving out that time for your studio work, that you're still making your work, and then have the time that you're actively working on the business part be separate. Because I do think it's
Mm-hmm.
really different. And I think it's really different I think it's hard to grow as an artist in a creative way if you're thinking about the business stuff. And it's really easy to get caught up with that. Like any business, when you're building it, you get obsessed. Maybe
Yeah.
that's just me.
No.
Right. And all, all your time starts to get taken up by the business. But I think that's to the detriment of your artwork. And so it's really important to be still carving out that time for your own artwork.
I love that.
Because what are you going to sell otherwise eventually, right? So, and the way that we talk about our work, or that we share it to connect with people, with potential buyers, is only more authentic when you're working. I think,
Mm.
we're too removed otherwise. I think we need to be still making our creative work.
I think that's a beautiful point. So just for you specifically, do you have days of the week where you're in the business and days of the week where you're just in the studio, or do you do split your hours? How are you managing that part?
Yeah, so it's hard. I found that my schedule has changed over the years because I have an 8-year-old son, and so I found that I've always kind of, since he was born, I've adjusted according to his schedule. And now that everyone's at home, I've kind of kept it. I've really been simplifying. So studio time is generally in the mornings, and then the business side of things is in the afternoon.
Brilliant.
I try to keep it really simple. So
I think that's a great, and since my son is, almost 3, he'll be 3 in a couple weeks. I've had to do the same thing, right? Like it has to go around him first. Like
yeah.
once I can figure out his schedule, then I can figure out, but I'm in a flux now because he's in a change. And so I'm figuring out
Right.
my new system. So it's so good to hear what you're doing, that morning afternoon split, just for your brain. It's like, you don't have to think about, well, is this business time? Is this creative time? It's like, oh, it's before
I mean,
noon.
of
So
course, there are times where, there's some not
yeah,
overlap, but sometimes I might have to, send some emails or make some calls in the morning.
right.
But generally, I try to keep that
I love
for
it.
studio. So,
I love it. Well, I'm so glad that we got to talk today. How can people find you, and what's the best, like where, I know you already mentioned your show in Charlotte, which is coming up in a couple weeks. But where can people find not only your painting, but your social media? What's the best way for people to connect with you?
yeah. So my website is simply my name. So it's www.jessicasingerman.com. And there you can find more about me and my work. My shop is there as well, with paintings and prints, books as well. And then on Instagram and Facebook, I'm at Jessica Singerman Fine Art.
Brilliant. Oh, I'm so glad that we got to connect today. It's been such a pleasure.
Thank
And you
you.
had some great nuggets. I can't wait to share this with you so that you can have this to share with your audience. So again, everybody make sure you look up Jessica, follow her on the social medias, get on her email list. I'm pretty sure you have a great email list as well that you connect with
Yes,
people.
that's right. And they can
So
sign up right from the homepage.
perfect. So get on Jessica's email list as well. And I can't wait to share more art business topics with the folks on this podcast. So thanks again, Jessica. It was such a pleasure.
Thank you, CJ.